Dr. Yasir Qadhi, then we can talk about that one. Yeah. So what's his opinion?
So he said that among non-Muslim scholars of Hadith, that it's not really taken seriously, these Hadith, that they don't go all the way back to the Prophet.
That's not true.
That's what I've heard. So I want to know your opinion.
That's not true. The scholars are taken very seriously. In fact, some of the scholars, like Dr. Jonathan Brown, because of Hadith studies, he became a Muslim. So I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about here. Why are you not a Muslim?
Sorry?
Why are you not a Muslim?
So, one thing, people often say, Muhammad was...
What's your name, sorry?
Sorry, Austin.
Austin, I'm Mansur. Nice to meet you.
I've seen your videos.
All right. If you come here, we'll see your videos too. That's how it works.
Sure. So, people will say Muhammad was the perfect example, or they'll give other kinds of evidence. A lot of this is based on Hadith. So I'm wondering, why should I trust Hadith? Especially since, according to Yasir Qadhi, I'm not an expert, but it seems like a lot of these aren't taken seriously among non-Muslims. So what's your take on that?
Who is Yasir Qadhi? Which Yasir Qadhi are you referring to?
I'm not. I just remember seeing a video.
Okay, never mind. If you're thinking about someone...
I'm not sure.
Yeah. If you think about Dr. Yasir Qadhi, then we can talk about that one. Yeah. So what's his opinion?
So he said that among non-Muslim scholars of Hadith, that it's not really taken seriously, these Hadith, that they don't go all the way back to the Prophet.
That's not true.
That's what I've heard. So I want to know your opinion.
That's not true. The scholars are taken very seriously. In fact, some of the scholars, like Dr. Jonathan Brown, because of Hadith studies, he became a Muslim. So I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about here. Many Orientalist scholars are taking very seriously. In fact, they're very praising the whole system. You don't have anything even similar in Western tradition. The amount of and the strictness and the robustness of our Hadith scientists is nothing equivalent to anything from antiquity. Anything. Because if you look at anything from, say from the Bible, or from the Romans and the Greeks and the Persians, whatever comes from antiquity, if we were to ascertain whether there are indeed these things said or reported, what is our mechanism now in non-Islamic sciences, and we can compare with Islamic sciences. So what scholars do in textual criticism, as I'm sure you're familiar, Austin, they look at how early these things are, these records are.
The isnad? The isnad? The isnad, is that what they're looking at, that you're talking about? The chains of transmission?
No, I'm talking about non-Islamic criteria of verifying and authenticating historical reports. So they look at how things are in the very earlier times when they're written down. So how early are they? Is it contemporary to the event, or is it much later? For example, if you look at the writings of Josephus, for example, about his antiquity, the earliest extant manuscript is like 1,000 years later, from the 10th century. So it is, even though it is believed to have been written, because you can see other people talking about it in their own writings, but the manuscripts of Josephus himself is like 1,000 years from his time. So even though it was compiled early, the early attestation of his writings is much later. So how do we deal with this kind of material is a big question. So early attestation, contemporary or not, and then the other thing they look at is multiple attestation. Are there a lot of people writing about this event? Like imagine a dinosaur came up from the ground here, and only Austin talked about it. When there were cameras and people with their phones.
I could be full of it.
Exactly, because an event of this magnitude is expected naturally. We're using the natural methodology, not miraculous things that you were the only ones to witness these things and no one witnessed it. But we are saying no, everyone saw a dinosaur walking past, having a lunch or a brunch of some people here and there, and it walked past over there. It is expected that a lot of people will be talking about it to their friends and colleagues and families and children for generations to come, because such an event doesn't happen every day. Yeah? So multiple attestation is one of the criteria they use. But there are some other criteria which I think are not really robust criteria, like they talk about the principle of embarrassment. Because you can actually, if you're smart enough and say, let me write something, and people might think, that may be true, because you're anticipating people will say, like, this event that you're talking about something against yourself, which people don't do. They don't self-criticize. They don't self-criticize about their community. So these events must be true, because that's not what we expect from people, to criticize themselves or their own community. But this can be easily forged, okay? But in general, very early attestation, contemporary, multiple witnesses, that's what they normally want to see if an event is of ancient times. Compare this to the Bible or any other literature, or whether secular or sacred. What do we have? We have a very confusing amount of literature. The narrations within the Christendom in terms of who Christ was he someone who was sitting on the branch of a tree and witnesses Simon the Cyrene being crucified and he was laughing? Was he someone who didn't physically die? So Christians were writing left, right and center about Jesus Christ. Gospel of St. Thomas, Gospel of the Ebionites, Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of Philip, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Judas, and the list goes on. More than 40 Gospels have been authored by people who call themselves, presumably, Christians, because that's what they're talking about, their savior figure of some kind. So what do we understand about the historical identity of this person? Who do we take it from? We can't just brush them aside like, oh, these people had weird belief. They didn't believe in the physical suffering that God can go through. So they're called Gnostics. No, that's a preassumption. Why are we accepting the others and not the Arians? Why taking the Athanasius against the Arians or Trinitarians, and a whole plethora of information coming from a lot of people within the first few hundred years of Christianity. The fact that we don't have contemporary writings, because the writings haven't either survived or it wasn't written. Like what we find in the recordings of Paul, St. Paul, in his writings he's not aware of any gospel written by anyone called Mark, Matthew, Luke, or John. So presumably these were compiled later, because he would have known, because he's the one going about preaching about a gospel of Christ, and he is having some issues with his contemporaries. They're opposing this, two opposing gospel, and he's trying to say, no, you can have the Gentiles coming in, you don't have to be circumcised in flesh, and so on. So he seems to be appealing to the secular Greek-speaking to bring into this community that he's trying to arrive, not like what James and others trying to do. So we don't have this multiple attestation of people. We have late sources, and they're contradictory. Why is John called the non-synoptic gospel, for example? Because it doesn't adapt to the narratives of the three other gospels, which are called the synoptic gospels, seen with the one same eye, okay, synoptic, because they have a similar kind of themes, but John seems to be quite separate. So the scholars who study these kind of things, they will say, he's projecting his Jesus onto the real Jesus. So he wants Jesus to be like this, that the way he's projecting it. So it's not the Jesus of history. So all the sayings of Jesus said, I am the bread, I am the life, and so on, it's all predominantly in John's gospel, not in the other gospels. So we have this kind of problems in attestating, but compare now to the Islamic sciences, okay? We have reports system in which when it was compiled in circulation to the community, mass community, it was already available in private hands. They had their own copies, they had their own circle and their own students. They learned and taught in this way. But it was then with major compilers, compiled formally, and they started giving you where they got the information from. So for example, Imam Bukhari, you've probably heard of Sahih Bukhari,
yes.
He would say, these are my teachers from which I am learning from, getting information from, and then I independently went through and collected this material from people. And each people that I'm getting this from, for example, from Austin. Imagine I want to know something about 100 years ago. What happened? So I've come to you, Austin, I heard you have some information to tell. And then I said, okay, fine, let me check about Austin. How good person you are. Do you have honesty, integrity? Do you have a good character, good memory? And because you weren't there 100 years ago, did you get this information from someone that I can say, yeah, you met that person? So did you meet the person that you are narrating from? So you have someone called, like, say, Abdullah over there, okay? So were you contemporary of Abdullah, okay? Did you actually hear from Abdullah or not? I've analyzed your character. I see no reason of disbelief in you because other people are testifying about you, that you are an honest person. You've heard or you've written down your material from Abdullah, who actually taught you from his material, okay? So it could be from memory or it could be from writing. Still, it will count as a transmission. So if I know that this is what you have done, I will just check that, okay, you've met Abdullah. There's no reason to me doubt, and I can ascertain that. Go to Abdullah, okay? So this is the next person in the chain. Abdullah didn't witness that event either. He heard from, say, brother, Abdurrahman. So did Abdurrahman and Abdullah meet? Have to understand that. Abdullah, what about his character again? What do people say about him? If there is any hint or some understanding that he is not a person of good character and integrity, then it's already in question whether he actually heard from him. Then your information that you're passing from him, even though you're of good character, the information will lose credibility value because his weakness. If he was known, for example, actually, everything's fine. He had a good memory, but later in life, he lost his memory. So I would have to ascertain at what point did you hear from him? In his later point of life when he lost his memory, or weakened memory, or earlier point. So if I establish that you heard from him, wrote down, in early part of his life when he had memory no issues, then I can say information, the credibility is still of a higher value. But if it's weaker when you got it, then even though you are of a good person, good memory, I would not consider the material that I'm getting from you has this good value. So this is how we are ascertaining from Abdullah to Abdurrahman, because Abdurrahman is the one directly who witnessed the event. So I would say, is Abdullah trustworthy again? Abdurrahman trustworthy? Same thing, character witness. So if I can establish this chain of narration, which you said earlier on, isnad system, then I have a reason to say, these reports that you have transmitted to me, I can accept it as being true. Because people normally lie about these things, and in this chain, I have established that lying was not involved. As much as I could verify from understanding your character, the character of every person in the chain, as witnessed and documented and testified by people. Because we rely on people's testimony in everything in our life, whether in a scientific journal or not, because how many scientific experiments have been repeated? Maybe once or twice for something, and everyone then takes it from their testimony. But this is how we've repeated it. Later on, sometimes we find conspiracy and so on, conspired together, forgery. But we don't repeat every single scientific experiments in every lab, in every scientist, for everything. We take by testimony because we trust them, that they're credible. They don't have no reason to lie and give us false information, even though that's a possibility, but we actually discount this. So when we established this, it was just the information that you said is to give credibility to that information. Information could be true, and yet, say Bukhari went to someone, he found the chain of narration to be all weak. But the information that Bukhari got it from you, and Abdullah and Abdurrahman, is the same. Say he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Surely every action is by their intention. That statement from this chain is reliably authentic. But he found another chain of people transmitting it. They were either liars, bad memory, bad character. He would not take that information from them, even though the text is called matan. So you have the isnad, and now you have the matan, which is the text itself. Even though the text is the same as the others. But because of where he gets this from, he does not consider this text to be authentically transmitted, reliably transmitted, to be taken as credible. So that is the system of isnad. Compared to any other systems from antiquity, you will see, because this is not only just memory, it's also in writing in many cases. Yeah. Bukhari is not the only one writing. We have his teachers writing. For example, when we look at, say, Hammam ibn Munabbih Sahifa, okay, we can see these hadiths are transmitted and collected by later compilers like Ahmad bin Hanbal and others. And you'll find all of these, every single narrations in Sahih Hammam ibn Munabbih is authentically found in other compilations later. We didn't have that Sahih Hammam ibn Munabbih until very late. We had no historical extant manuscripts. Ignore him.
Sorry, I'm trying to.
Yeah. No extant documentation. Now we've discovered them, written, edited, published. And we now do the comparison, and you can see how these were independently arrived at by other compilers, independent of Sahih Hammam ibn Munabbih, by this person, that his compilation. Independent of that. So now you have multiple witnesses to that statement that is recorded in Sahih Hammam ibn Munabbih. This individual had a chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Bukhari, Ahmad bin Hanbal and others, they had their information from other chains. Even from people who may not have known each other or recognized to have met even from each other, from other different localities, but the same information. So we have actually, from what the Prophet said, from the earlier people, from his students, the companions, the Ashab Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when they started teaching their children and they spread away around the globe in different places. So his students then, they were not in contact with another. But when you go back and trace backwards, and you can see, you can trace a common link, who this information is coming from. So many Western scholars have studied this, as you know, where they accept this common link theory, that at least we can go back to the person with the common link, okay? And of course, you can go further, because you don't have to stop there, because where did he get it from? Well, why are we doubting al-Zuhri, for example, okay? Because what's his character integrity in question that we should doubt him? And if you have more than one common link, coming from the Prophet. So these are what the Western scholars like Motsky, Harold Motsky is one of the names that the Prophet had, who started talking about and making it widespread among the Western academics about the common link theory. And this is now being modified and refined by others that we can actually go by. Same thing about the Qur'an. You can actually go and trace back all the way towards certain readers who within the community was well known. So it's definite that, okay, the masahif or the copies of the Qur'an that we have, for example, if we trace back, they can go back to all of these companions through this common link from generation to generation. Why would that not be a reliable system compared to say, I want to know whether Gospel of Matthew, the author, is transmitting accurate information? What do I have? So, who is Matthew? Is he a physician? We don't even know. I mean, who is he? What do we know about him? And moreover, his character. Because he wasn't an eyewitness. Some people want to say he's an eyewitness. So, okay, take a clear example of Luke, for example. Because he clearly says in this gospel, for as much as I have seen other people writing, it seemed good to me also to collect and write all of these things for this excellent Theophilus, so people more know that it's true. I'm paraphrasing his introduction. Yeah? So he is not a primary witness, but he's collecting information like other people are doing. How do we know he's reliable? Did he have a good memory? Was he truthful? These are the two essential questions one should ask, because someone who is not from that time. If he was a companion of Christ himself, who Christ molded them in their character, his disciples, I would say fine. If they were taught and molded in their character and integrity by Christ, I can take their words, okay? Because these people would have no reason, when they have directly learned from and were deemed to be his disciples, testified by very person himself, okay? I can take their words. I don't need to get attestation from people. I would say, no problem. But the problem starts with when we don't have direct things from them. It's written by other people, transmitted to other people. Then we have to say, did they actually really get it from the disciples of Christ? The disciples were ordinary fishermen. That's how Jesus went to teach people. It wasn't like you had a philosopher and a literate in Koine Greek who was within him. That's what the scholars say. Ordinary fishermen, mainly. They obviously did not transmit this kind of high-level Greek literature that we see in the Greek Gospels, for example. So obviously it couldn't have come from them. So this is why when we verify or to assess, to verify, we see the problem straight away. We don't know Luke's informants and how trustworthy and how good of memory they were. So automatically, if we were to compare the isnad system in Islam of historical verification of historical reports, the Bible will be considered weaker than our weakest hadith.
Weaker than Da'if?
Yes. Because Da'if hadith has this kind of errors, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's totally fabricated, but if you were to compare even acceptable hadith, because weak hadith can still be acceptable in certain cases, like conveying to people to encouragement, be nice, be good, do this, these kind of things, because it's not to do with legislation. So scholars have categorized saying, in cases like this, even weak hadith, doesn't mean it's fabricated, it's just there's some weaknesses on the narrator, so we say this is still acceptable. But the Bible, in that category, is just even weaker than our weak hadiths. So when I say, for example, why you're not a Muslim, and you say you want to know about the hadith system, if you compare it in terms of the robustness, you have more reason to accept the hadith than the Gospels or any other writing for that matter. Just on historical verification of materials of antiquity alone. But we haven't talked about the information content itself, because that's how the people giving you the information, whether in written form or in verbal form. But the contents itself, what does it say? Is there anything in the contents that definitely convinces you? That we haven't talked about today. So when you look at the Qur'an, for example, you will see this information in the Qur'an that will make you think, why is this information in the Qur'an when we can't expect this information to be in there? It's well ahead of its time. The natural world it describes, people could not have thought about it. You can't describe under-oceanic mid-oceanic waves, for example, okay? Because the technology wasn't there, and you can't go and dive and witness those things. Or even the universe is expanding and then will roll back again at one point. The whole coherent narrative about the creation and its end of the universe, we are learning with our current understanding of science more and more, and it's going in line with what the Qur'an is saying. We verify science and its achievement by the standard of the Qur'an. That's the Muslim standpoint. Not verify the Qur'an based on current science. So when we look at the current science, yeah, you're almost there. So why do we find information like this in the Qur'an, where something that is established in our natural world knowledge, okay? The earth is not a triangular prism, because we've gone outside of it and witnessed it. So if we find the Qur'an talks about as it is in reality, how does the Qur'an know this kind of information? That's the question one would be asking. The Qur'an challenges people, if you are in doubt as to what has been revealed to the slave of God, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then produce or imitate something like of its surah, which is like a chapter. A surah is a thematic unity, and each surah in its composition and style is different from every other surah of the Quran, out of these 114 surahs. Smallest one being like 3 ayat or 3 lines. Why is it stylistically, in the stylistics of the composition, it is not possible to imitate it? It's not about eloquence. Quran has eloquence, in the highest eloquence. But the way it's composed of objectively with rhetorical devices, the linguistic newness. Let me give you an example. We always say before we start beginning anything, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Bismillah, in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. It occurs in the Quran, in every chapter of the Quran apart from Surah 9, because it's talking about war and so on, so God's mercy is not invoked. The composition of Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the stylistics, like in the name of someone who is ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in this pattern. So you can use the same linguistic pattern and say, in the name of the king who is generous, more generous. Because ar-Rahman ar-Rahim comes from the same form of this word which has the meaning of mercy. Rahman means so much immediate mercy that is intense. Ar-Rahim is a very prolonged mercy, like continuation of it. And that's the mercy for the believers in the hereafter. But Ar-Rahman is like for this world, everyone is having this mercy from God, whether you are a believer or not believer. So this thinking is there. So this pattern of Ar-Rahman in the pattern of, if I were to now go into the patterns, Fa'lan and Ar-Rahim, which is Fa'il. This is how we can objectively look at the patterns of it. And if you were to now use similar kind of patterns with other words, say Atshan and Atish, I mean thirsty. The Arabs will really think like, did you learn Arabic from somewhere or did you make it up? Right. No, this is what they will ask. The moment you start talking about that Bismillah, Bismillah, Austin, Al-Atshan, Atish. They will say, that's not how we speak, my friend Austin. Atish is not how we use in here. It's not the way we would speak. Because the Arabs have a form of speech, whether it's to do with their grammatical way or the way they will consider something acceptable as eloquent and acceptable. So they would not use that. No, we don't say Atshan and Atish. Okay, maybe generous. Al-Akram, Al-Karim, even that we would not consider a generous statement. So in ordinary language even today, the Arabs will reject this formulation because they don't consider this kind of eloquence in this construction. But when it comes to the Qur'an, they've already testified long before this is highly eloquent in these two forms, how it exemplifies the mercy of God, intense and prolonged in this way. No question about that. The Arabs at that time, knowing and having mastery of Arabic language, did not question about this thing at all. But if we were to imitate this pattern, we find the problem of acceptance of the Arab literates. But that's not eloquent. And that's just one verse or one ayah of the Qur'an. If you now consider the whole surah, this is the problem that we find. And this has been objectively demonstrated by an academic scholar, Dr. Ahmed Bassam Sa'i. He wrote a book called Al-Mu'jiza, the miracle, okay? But Mu'jiza meaning in the linguistic sense, okay? Returning back to the linguistic miracle, that's his whole thesis. First book was his methodology, going through in details how he arrives at all of these stylistics that are in the Quranic chapters. He starts with a big surah, an intermediate big surah called Surah Al-Muddathir. And his conclusion is only one phrase, ثُمَّ نَظَرَ, out of how many surah, how many verses was it? I can pull it up and show you. That is unique to what's this called? Identicality of tarkib and ta'bid in terms of expression commonality. The Arabs use this. ثُمَّ نَظَرَ. Yeah. Then he looked back again. It is common how the Arabs would use it, and they talked about it. Every other expression from this, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فهجر ولا تمنن تستكثر ولربك فاصبر. If you go to all of this, it's not something the Arabs ever used in their linguistic composition in this form of stylistics. Because language has stylistics, rhymes and meters and the way you speak. Like the Arab poetry were like this. Ala layta. Like this. This is how they start. Hal abitanna laylatan. Specific forms. But the Quran totally goes against this traditional mode and identified something totally unique to them. Like, what is this? It's not poetry, it's not prose, it's not the saying the soothsayers, but it's very touching, warming, eloquent, highly profound in meaning. They were like, what is it? When they sent one of their best person to go and check out who is this individual talking about all of these things, he was mesmerized when he came back and he was about to repeat, he couldn't repeat what he heard, even though they could just memorize by hearing, right? Only thing that was resonated is about the sa'iqat, about Ad and Thamud, the the fate that befell the tribes of Ad and Thamud with this sa'iqa, strong sound. Okay? So that particular last statement that he heard, he could only remember that one. And everything else he couldn't, because if I now speak to you in English, but in total different grammar system. Me no eat rice, and that's a very mundane example. To repeat that, because you know you don't speak like that. I don't eat rice, not me not eat rice, right? So if it was like the whole chapter with all these grammatical novelties or linguistic novelties, everything like this, how would you even repeat it? Because that was totally unique to you. How could you even remember these things? That's exactly what happened, because this is the amount of linguistic newness that the Quran introduced, that they encountered. And so Dr. Ahmed Bassam Sai, his methodology in this whole first volume. Second volume, application. People want to know, is it transferable and applicable to any other surah of the Quran? You claim, that's his claim, as he demonstrates, that the Quran, in each surah, if you have no time, let me know.
No, I'm good.
Okay, if you have any surah of the Quran, the amount of linguistic newness far exceeds the total number of words in the surah. So a surah, Al-Fatiha, if it had 29 words, you can ignore her. If you had 29 words in Surah Al-Fatiha, for example, the linguistic newness would be more than 29, far exceeding the total number of words in the surah. So if Surah Al-Muddassir have 236 words, for example, it will have the linguistic novelty more than that. Yep. So he applied in volume 2. About 21 surahs and one big surah, Surah Al-Fatiha, if I remember correctly. And he showed that for each of the surah, that's exactly the case. The linguistic novelties far exceeds, not just the same, exceeds the number of total words in that surah. If a surah had 100, it will be 101 or more. Okay? Now that is talking about a composition of the in the Arabic language, in the highest eloquence, from an individual who is known by the people not to have learned from anyone literature, poetry, or prose, let alone compose this kind of compositions. You know, the Arabs were very community of pride. Poetry is something that took very much pride in. If someone were to compose a good poetry, celebration. Birth of a son, celebration. Birth of a female daughter, blackness all over the face. Liability, financial liability. And some of them would go and take that live child and bury under the sun, alive. This is a bad custom, but it doesn't mean everything was bad. This was because they considered a financial liability of rearing female in a family. So they would really celebrate and even hang on the wall of the Kaaba one of their best compositions. They are called mu'allaqat. Have you heard of mu'allaqat? Something that is hanging, suspended. So they hang it on the wall of the Kaaba, and people will see it like, it's like, imagine your art is like in Louvre or in those museums in London, which are the most famous museums of art, for example, or famous art galleries. Everyone will really say, wow, look at this. So the Quran would come and totally make them numb and incapacitated. They can't match it. They're not able to repeat it. Do you know about rap music today? Thank you. Rap music? So yes, thank you so much. You are composing something instantly with rhymes and meters maybe, and I try to respond to you in rhymes and meters, okay? Not in prose like this, because that won't be musical composition. That is the kind of competition. So that's what you used to do by them. When the Quran came and asked them to, okay, go on, do the similar kind of composition to match it. That was it. That was the end of their era of linguistic composition of Arabic literature, in the sense of how the Quran came and totally dominated and totally numbed the Arabs of their time, because it was not possible for them to imitate. And this continues to this day. It didn't stop them from composing poetry, but they would never dare imitate the Quran, because they wouldn't be able to, as they have testified themselves. So people today, people say, yeah, we can do it. And you go on the internet, they've written in English, written in Bengali, and you're wondering, do they even know what the challenge is? It's not to do with just the intended meaning of what is there. It's the linguistic composition and the stylistics of that language, not in Greek or in Hebrew or in Bengali, for that matter. So they fail to understand that, and they fail to understand that the Quran has a particular stylistics which are objectively now to be analyzed. So this author goes through, say, this chapter and shows you this is how we speak in our ordinary language, how you would say. Like if you say, وَسَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. How this is how we would say in our contemporary or normal Arabic to match that composition. You would not say these kind of things. So that is what is needed to be done to imitate the Quran, and people are not able to do that. I have been doing live streams to the Bengali audience for a long time now, and for a year or so, challenging every week. If you really think it's not from God, and you have people very literate in Arabic language, bring it on, and we will see how you can imitate a stylistics. As you expect, they tried sometimes because of their, come on, how can you say we can't, because we are free thinkers and this is nothing. With the help of AI and so on, they themselves admitted, okay, it doesn't fulfill the conditions of the Quran. It's not about just, as I said, a meaning or something that you bring which sounds similar to one word, or even total plagiarism. Like if the Quran said, for example, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you say, Alhamdu, Li Austin, Rabbil Alameen. Just changing one word. That's not how you would imitate something, okay? Because you're doing a plagiarization here, and it will not be even in a rap music accepted by your opponent, okay? So they have failed and failing. So the question is, why aren't people waking up to this challenge of the Quran and looking at the reality and at least admitting that this is not a human composition? Some people have done so. And they said, maybe it was Shaitan, Satan. Human can't do it, maybe Satan. And yet, they don't understand what their implication is. I'm saying, the Quran says, if you want to read this book, فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. فَإِذَا or وَإِذَا. When you are going to recite, read the Quran, then seek refuge with God from the Satan who's accursed. Satan telling you, when you read my book, curse me. Does it make sense? It says, take Shaitan as your worst enemy. Don't follow his footsteps. Give to the orphans. Help the needy and the poor, the destitute. Speak the truth. Be just. Be fair. Even if it goes against yourself, be a firm eyewitness and testimony and a testifier. Give that testimony. Worship God alone. Don't worship the creation. Do you expect Satan would write something like this in his book? Satan is all about taking away from God. People to take away from God, doing all these evil things. Satan can't write against himself, like the Bible actually says something like this. So the idea or this particular explanation that the Quran can come from Satan, it doesn't add up. Linguistically, philosophically, logically, or even with just thinking about these things. Yeah? So it doesn't really rationally explain this kind of things. Even the Quran says, even if mankind or the jinn, Shaitan was one of the jinns, if they were to come together, still, they would not be able to produce something like it. Yeah? And the Quran says, وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُمْ. It is not within their capacity. They will not be able to do so. Yeah. What the Quran gives, Shaitan and Satan, whatever, it's not possible even for them to have this kind of information. So whether it's a linguistic composition, whether it's in knowledge content, so this is all we have in the Quran. So this was one example of our challenge to confirm by falsifying it. There's another falsification test. Quran says, had this been from any other than God, وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. You'll find many discrepancies, many contradictions. If you know two propositions to be contradictory, 8 conditions must be fulfilled. Not many people know that. The subject, the object, the time, the quantity, qualitatively, all of this. For example, I'll give a minor example. It's warm in London and it's not warm in London. 2 statements, P and minus P, are contradictory. But are they really contradictory? What's the context?
Depends on the time.
Depends on the time, the seasons. It's in summer and in winter. So both statements are true in their respective context. So when you take in the context of when it's said, the statements are not contradictory. Yeah? Enough, I think, I mean, you're smart enough to understand that the subject and the object, all of this needs to be aligned to have two propositions contradictory. So the Quran challenges people. If you really think, then you should be able to find discrepancies. And we have been dealing with this kind of claims for decades in Speak a Scholar. You've probably seen me speaking about it, you know, in other times and years in the past. And that's what we try to, you know, raise people to that level of scrutiny. Think about it. A book that is composed over 23 years, not just 1 year. People change their mind. How many times I have changed my mind on something because I've learned more, developed my thinking got better, for example, in certain areas. So what I've said, even in Speaker's Corner, what I've said sometimes, I don't take them to be of my current understanding of this. I would say these are mansur, these are abrogated. I do not hold to these views anymore. It happens, every people like that. They develop, they change, whether in a political theory or anything. But the Quran talks about natural world, talks about history, talks about something that will happen in the future, talks about the previous books and so on. Why are we not able to find a true contradiction when we expect it to be found in such a book? We're not saying like why the phone book doesn't have a contradiction, because it's composed in a certain different way. Quran is composed in over the 23 years circumstantially. Information came, it was then added to place here and there by the dictates of the Prophet from God. So not the Quran today is the Quran that was chronologically revealed to the Prophet. He would say, okay, place that particular portion that is now revealed in that chapter over there. How is it then we found with the final composition is coherent? Because you don't work out how the whole surah from beginning to end will be coherent over a period of number of months or so on. Because in your mind, you don't know how it's going to look like. Because circumstantially, something happened, and then God says, okay, about this matter, it says like, okay, who are we going to spend to? قُلِ الْعَفْوِ يَسْأَلُونَكَ. They ask you about, and then the response comes, because that was the question people are asking. And then the response comes immediately from or within the time frame of revelation. Exactly this, okay? Qul, say this is the case. Question and the answer. So he wouldn't have thought about this in his mind, which is like a computer, that I am going to compose in this chapter about this issue and write this there. But what we find, this is what's so interesting to study the Quran, about psychoanalysis of the content matter. How is it this particular chapter, which was portions of it revealed at different time periods, and they're coherently of a same thematic unity? Thematic unity has been studied by academics, like for example at SOAS, Dr. Salwa El-Awa at School of Oriental and African Studies. Okay, so her whole PhD thesis is this linguistic coherence or thematic unity. You can find some papers or her whole book on it, showing you how this, or say Dr. Abdul Rauf, another academic, how he's described, or talk about Professor Mustansir Mir, another academic. He's written a book called Coherence in the Qur'an based on his PhD thesis, because his thesis is all that. He went through a whole tafsir or commentary of the Qur'an by Amin Ahsan Islahi, okay, showing you the thematic unity of each surah and connecting each surah to the other. The whole Qur'an from beginning to end, thematically all connected. How is that even possible? Because it was all everywhere initially. It wasn't composed in that particular order. Not just surahs, but within the surah material. So that itself shows you how is that possible from a mind to compose bits and pieces of information together and make it all coherent, follow coherent logical connection from one chapter to the other, when they were not even revealed in this way. The first chapter of the Qur'an that was revealed, or the first ones, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, read in the name of God who created. That is like the 96th chapter or something, I can't remember something like that, of the Qur'an, right? But it was the first one to reveal. So even to analyze the whole Qur'an coming from a human mind in this way, if it was composed, we can't explain it rationally how this is possible. If your explanation is, he was a computer, he was a genius. That's what people are trying to come up with, because there's no other explanation. So he's a genius in this, he's a genius when it comes to art, literature, military strategies. He's a genius in every single discipline, but he's not a genius in to be a prophet. Everything else is genius in everything, but only thing is, he's not a prophet. So now the question comes in, okay, let's assess the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For the 40 years of his life, he was known to be a Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful, trustworthy individual. Did not compose poetry, write poetry, recite poetry, nothing of that. His people would have known if he did, because it was a closed community. Mecca at that time wasn't like a metropolitan city like we see, like no one knows anyone. Like how many people do you know here? Few. But Mecca, people, when they were living, they would know most people by themselves. Apart from the season of Hajj, when people will come from other places, for example. Yeah? Because these are newcomers, these are guests, foreigners that comes. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known growing up among the community, not learning any of the trades of poetry or prose or literature composition. He comes up with the Qur'an, and then he is saying all of these things. Now, there's few possibilities. Either he is lying, deceiving people by claiming to be a prophet of God. That is a conscious decision on his part for a particular reason and motive. Because why would he, not being from God, do that? Because he has to have a motive. You don't just do something when people are attacking you and even up to plot to kill you. You risk your life, maybe because you have a goal in mind. Maybe you want to become the leader. Maybe you want to become the king. Maybe you want to become the wealthy. Maybe you want to have women because of your influence. So there are lots of reasons where political gain could have been a modus operandi of his thinking, why he would be a fake individual, an imposter pretending to be a prophet. Or maybe he was actually sincere, not lying, but he was deluded and crazy and insane. He didn't know that he was. Some people, they don't know what they claim. Or maybe he didn't even exist. It was all legends. People made stories about him. Pious forgery of the community. They just made him that the person, he existed and he said all these things. Or he could be a true prophet. If you analyze now in terms of his person and what he's done, these are the main things of possibilities that could have led him to bring about this particular religion or this message that he brought. If we were to analyze all of them, leave the last one, that he was a genuine prophet of God, none of those stands to scrutiny. If he was lying, we need to establish his motive. He lived a life? Was it of luxury when he got all that he needed? Or he lived a life where he didn't have anything to eat for days? When he was sleeping, he would sleep probably in a brick type thing and a mattress made of palm leaves. One time, he complained. Why is it too soft? Because his wife folded it twice. A companion, his friend, is Umar radiallahu anhu, Uthman, one of them, radiallahu anhu. He saw the marks of these palm fibers on his back. And he was very sad, of course, because a prophet that is now like the emperor of all of this land, where he could have in the best mattresses of Persia or Rome, something like this within his control, and yet he's sleeping in a mattress made of the palm fibers. So this is the lifestyle that he had. What happened when he was inviting people to accept God as their only creator, only one worthy of worship? They were trying to boycott him, expel him. Assalamu alaikum, Uncle Jamal, how are you? They even became frustrated to the point that they're saying, okay, what do you want? You know what? If you want to become the king, we'll make you the king. If you want to be the wealthiest person, we'll give you all the wealth. If you're after women, just name them. He rejected all of that. That was his time. To be the leader, to be the one in control, to be the one to be famous, to be the one to have all these luxuries. Wealth, money, women. What do people now strive by? These fake imposters of anyone, right? So he rejected all of that. In fact, he even said at one point, if you give me the sun in one hand and the moon in one hand, I would not stop calling you to this call that there is nothing worthy of worship except God alone. At one point, he had a golden opportunity. His son Ibrahim died, very young. And at that time, coincidentally, there was an eclipse. People were saying, look, even the sun or the moon, whatever the eclipse was, even that is showing sorrow to the son of the Prophet. Prophet ﷺ heard all of that and says, no. The sun and the moon does not eclipse for anyone, whether their birth or their death and so on. But these are just signs of God. So when you see that, praise God, the creator of the sun and the moon, worship, do a prayer. He taught us how to pray to God about those creations, to say these are his signs within the creation. That was a golden opportunity to say, of course, I am a prophet of God. Even the sun or the moon is eclipsed because my son died. That's what you expect fake individuals to do. So the material gain as a motive doesn't work at all. So he cannot be called a fake imposter because we cannot find any motive whatsoever. And what he brings, even if a fake individual were to say to something like this, how was he able to bring a Qur'an with all this linguistic composition? How was he able to bring information content of the past, prophesizing of the future, that's saying, oh, the Romans have been defeated in the nearest or the lowest land, but they soon will be victorious again in a period of bid'i sinin, between this number of years, 3 to 9 years. If it was a fake, imagine one of us were faking this. If we made that within the 3 to 9 years, they will regain victory again, knowing not the odds. Because two superpowers fighting with each other for a long time. It's not just suddenly once. They were actually fighting for a long time. And that's why the Quran talked about between 3 to 9 years, because these fightings will even continue here and there. And eventually, within the time frame towards the end, they will gain full victory. So if we were fake, we would not be able to say, for example, the people in Wales, what are they called? Welsh?
Yes, Welsh.
Wales and England. In United Kingdom, they will fight with each other and then say 2 years and 1 month later, after, say, Wales losing, they will be victorious again. What are the odds of that? You can't predict these kind of things. It's impossible to predict, okay? It could have happened before, it could have happened later, and it could not even happen. So the Romans that were defeated in Surah 30, Surah Al-Rum, as the Quran said, it was possible that they never regained victory. It was possible they regained victory the next year, not within the time frame, or any of the time frame. Then the Quran would have been proven false. And that prophet, the fake individual, would have been exposed as a fake imposter who was pretending to be a prophet, prophesizing of the future. It happened exactly the way it is. How do you account for that if someone was just lying? So lying option is rationally can be eliminated. No motives, the composition, the contents, it's not possible for even someone who is consciously doing that. Maybe he was insane, that's another possibility. Crazy, deluded. You don't get high eloquence from someone who is insane and crazy, talking about science and geology and astrophysics. In one verse, the Quran says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Do not the unbelievers see that the heavens and the earth was joined together as one piece, and God parted it asunder, and He brought every living thing from water? Would they then not believe? How would a crazy person describe astrophysics and biology in one verse about an information when even them at that time were not aware that this is the reality? Because the universe was static, as understood by the Greeks. It doesn't expand. It doesn't have a common origin. That's not enough. The common origin of life is from water. Every living thing is from water. The Prophet hasn't gone in a deep, dead volcano or underneath a deep ocean to look at all this miniature life that you can't see with your own eyes, composed of water. Most of living things are composed of water. Cytoplasm, 70% water. How did he even know these kind of things if he was deluded? A deluded person is not coherent. Qur'an, as I said, coherent throughout. Linguistic composition. You don't expect someone who's crazy to come up something like this. Prophecies? How do you predict the future? How do you talk about things of the past? That, the pharaohs, they call themselves Rabbul A'la. Ana Rabbukumul A'la. I am the most high God. Hieroglyphics were forgotten. People didn't know hieroglyphics in Arabia, or in Rome, or in Persia, or around the world at that time in 7th century. Today, after rediscovery of hieroglyphics, now we can go back and see pharaohs claim to be high God.